Like one of those all-in-one shampoo bottles that claims to do everything to your hair? Did you know that you've been conditioned? The idea of conditioning is so firmly ingrained in our society that talking about it seems almost surplus to requirement. But sometimes it's worth taking a minute to think about how you're being bombarded by just that every single waking day of your life. Let's take a loaf of bread as an example. You decide one morning that you want some bread, for reasons we'll not get into. It's a free-ish country. You can have your bread for any reason, so long as you're not assaulting someone with it. You transport yourself to the shop of your choice and head to the bakery section. What's the first thing that hits you upon your arrival there? Why yes, it's the smell. That's conditioning. And it's by design rather than a happy circumstance. If the making of bread smelt like rotting garbage, you can bet that the company would prevent its customers from picking up a whiff of that, due to the negative impact on sales. The smell of baked bread entices you to purchase bread, which will psychologically trick people who happen to be going through the bakery section to purchase bread, even though they weren't originally planning on doing so. Fortunately for our long-winded analogy, you already desire bread. Thing is, if you've gone to get your bread from a supermarket, you've already gone through several layers of conditioning. The advertisements outside prepare you for the purchase of items and suggest additional items. The clean atmosphere of the interior welcoming your senses. The swift change in temperature depending upon the weather outside to make you feel happier to be inside the store. The promotional ends that you need to pass by in order to reach your desired aisle. The music, the layout, and the lighting and colours surrounding you in a miasma of choice and sensation overload. All of it is carefully designed by professionals via committee, including extensive psychological research into the efficacy of layouts to entice additional expenditure. You're the human equivalent of the proverbial rat in the maze, responding to their gleeful stimuli 100 times over before you even reach that bread. So what has this got to do with DOS gaming? Well, you're a summation of your influences, both conscious and subconscious. Even my wayward writing style has been heavily influenced by other YouTubers I discovered over the years. In the case of games developers, the sensation overload has been kicked into overdrive, and the influences that the modern developers have are very different from those of the people typing away into their Apple IIs in the 70s and 80s. Take Richard Garriott. He grew up surrounded by astronauts near the Johnson Space Center, as his father was Owen Garriott, the astronaut. Then he moved to the tech hub that was California and benefited from Stanford University's experimental hardware turning up in his high school. Combine an academic upbringing with additional computer courses and a love of Dungeons and Dragons and Lord of the Rings, and you've got yourself a recipe for some truly extraordinary fantasy game creation. That in and of itself is something that millions of people have in common these days. But smack dab in the middle of the 1970s, there were a clutch of people who could do that, and it was an entirely different environment than the one you're subjected to now. Plus, they didn't have an astronaut as a dad. The 28th version of his Dungeons and Dragons game was programmed on the Apple II, and it evolved into a Calabeth after he gained access to a home machine. With the help of his mother's design skills and his father's mathematical prowess and money, he released it in 1979. Why did he do it? To become the next Skyrim? To get a deal with a game studio? No, he did it for fun, because he could, and that's the best reason to make a game. And it was the first RPG ever, so nobody had a clue what to think of it. 2 years later, he built on this initial success and made Ultima, and the rest is history. The belabored point I'm trying to make is that the conditioning Garriott was subjected to was entirely different to both the people of the here and now and many of his contemporaries. His childhood living around the space race era and his academic years in computing combined with the 60s and 70s United States backdrop are things that are never coming back. It's another entire video's worth of content that would be completely unrelated to the channel. Trust me. If it hadn't been Garriott, it would have been someone else around the same time period, like Robert Woodhead. But they're both cut from the same kind of cloth, and that was required in order to create what they did. It's easy to look back in hindsight and say, oh, I could have done that. But the differences between the America of the 60s and 70s and the world of the modern day are so pronounced that without your points of reference, you most likely couldn't do that. Every developer of RPGs nowadays is subject to the fact that Fallout and Morrowind and Planescape Torment and Knights of the Old Republic exist. The ground has been covered, and because of that, it's so much harder to both evoke those games, without negative comparison, and to create new ground to stand upon based on your own merits. While the likes of Garriott had little to no point of reference to build upon, the door was wide open in terms of opportunity, motive, and background. These days there's so many people making games, but the door has been shut to a fine sliver of a crack. A few geniuses are spilling through due to brute force, and they can make things new and exciting, like random, tortured Estonian artists using 70s world-building techniques to craft homages to those earlier games that still offer something a bit different due to their upbringing and political ideals. Without getting too political about it myself, the global mass consumerist culture requires infinite growth, but its efficacy and the backlash it has caused upon societies while chasing profit has led to another bell curve within the creative arts, with people putting these projects to the side in order to focus on survival first and foremost, with their unspoken genius replaced instead by commodities from large corporations and paint-by-numbers sludge accepted without question, by the majority who have been pilloried by societal conditioning to accept it. In summation, there's more hurdles for creatives to get over than ever before, despite the industry seeming like a land of opportunity. If you're a statistical outlier who is just as much a genius as your forefathers in your respective genre, and you're hell-bent on creating your masterpiece purely out of the love of doing so, you might still have to overcome the social conditioning, real-time degradation of your surrounding environment, and manage to be influenced in a very specific way in order to flourish. You need the time, opportunity, and support that is so often stripped away by modern expectations. And even if that goes to plan, the end product might just be disregarded as a decent clone of a title that appeared 20 years prior. Perhaps that's not the case though, and you had the greatest moment in gaming's future inside of you. This is why conditioning is important, because unfortunately, thanks to the 2020s, your greatest moment remained a pipe dream, and all you're left doing is buying your loaf of bread, watching DOS gaming YouTubers, and wondering where it all went wrong.